You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Well, happy Wednesday evening, folks. Welcome to my show, the Intrepid radio program, right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. Come on over, see all the goodness that is Odyssey Radio. And you can also see this broadcast, watch it in its video simulcast on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. And join the live chat room while you're there. That's where all the Intrepids meet, this little family of friends that we have that come together every night to listen to this show, except for the 2 nights this week that I wasn't here. So I was gone for a couple of nights. The first day was due to some technical snafus we had, and I'll let you know for those who listen and don't know this already. I live in a small town in Wisconsin, about a little less than an hour from the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota, over across the river into Wisconsin territory. And in these small towns over here, you can hook up to just any internet that you want to have. You are bound by the agreements that the city made with certain internet companies that monopolize certain areas of town. So let's say I can't just go get Comcast or Xfinity or AT&T or anything like that. I have to use the providers that are in town. And there's one small local company, and then there's another Frontier. And Frontier is what we're on, and Frontier basically kind of sucks. Their service is horrible. And they keep trying to improve. We're still on very low internet here because we just can't get. I tried to sign up for they had 24 megabyte service, which isn't much. Seeing as with Comcast, if you live in the city, you can get Comcast you can get 100 megabyte, 200 megabyte, I believe, and it's no different cost than you get out here. For the same cost, we get 24. And then they told me we can maybe bump that up a little bit. And they tried to do it, and it didn't do anything that was any different. Then we found out, they told me, oh, well, you're too close to the offices. I'm within a mile of the offices, and I couldn't get good service. I said, I think they told me I was too far away. I said, what do I have to be right next door to get good service? We're less than a mile from you. And, well, we don't know what we can do. They just couldn't get us good service. And so all of that to say, I was out on Monday. I was trying to do some recording with Rocky, and my internet wasn't stable, and it eventually fell. And it was out for half of our town for most of the day on Monday. By the time I could record a show or come in, I wasn't feeling so great. And so I was down a little under the weather on Monday, and yesterday I thought, I'm pretty good today. And when I came to putting this show together, just wasn't feeling it. And I got some kind of little chest infection. Now, I'll let you know, as you know, this has been going on for a week to 10 days already. And of course, the first thing in your mind is, oh my God, it's COVID. But I was having no other symptoms other than I was coughing and my chest hurt. And now I didn't go get tested or anything, but I'm feeling better today. But you can probably hear it in my voice. My voice is tired from having coughed. Other than that, I feel fine. Yesterday I was a little dragged out, and I slept half of the day. But maybe I just needed the sleep. Who knows? So all of that to say, welcome back, Scotty. I'm back today, and we'll see how today goes, and hopefully the rest of the week. So I get these little chest infections every year of my adult life. And Rainey even had it a little bit too, and she's feeling better. She, as you know, does massage therapy. And so she was out all day working yesterday. And so there, I've spent the first 4 minutes and 43 seconds of this show talking about why I wasn't here the last 2 days. And so I'll stop it there. It's good to be back. And thanks for missing me. I had some people send messages. I appreciate your well wishes and all of that. And so today, I wanted to pick up on our series that we've been doing. Now, I want to say a couple of things about going through the history of the conquering of the American West. We know it was already seen one way by the United States. That's our history. It's what we've done. We've grown to know that there were atrocities that were committed, and that the United States in its westward expansion was no different than any other country that was out there. We wanted to free ourselves of the shackles of Great Britain and the King of England. And so we declared a Declaration of Independence and also our freedom. And we fought a war and we won that freedom from Britain's colonial expansionism. And we were no longer part of that great empire. But then we set about to say we must have our own empire from sea to shining sea, and to take over the whole continent. The only problem was there were people already living there. So what did? We conquered those people. And for a country to have written that all men are created equal and endowed by their creators with their creator with certain unalienable rights, and among those primarily are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But what we did as a country was inconsistent with that message, because we drove the inhabitants that were here out. And so what we're left with today, and it is a mere 120 years since the last real atrocity was committed, the attack on the ghost dancers at Wounded Knee. And there was fallout from all of that. You look at Native American culture today, we would always talk about the drunken Indians when I was growing up in Minneapolis. Because north of us and south of us, there were the reservations all over. And reservation life was pretty bleak. And so they were a conquered people. And there is one perspective that says, I'm not responsible for what my ancestors did. Would we have done it differently today? Maybe. Would we have two nations here on this continent, or more than that? Would there be all different kinds of Indian nations that were sovereign nations? And had we stuck to the treaties of even the permanent Indian, not territory, frontier it was called, that was west of the Mississippi. If you today live west of the Mississippi, or it got moved a few years later to the 95th meridian, if you're west of that markation in the United States today, if we had kept the permanent Indian frontier and stuck to that treaty, then the nation, everybody living west of the Mississippi, you wouldn't be living there. You'd be living east of the Mississippi. But we broke those treaties, and every time we broke those treaties, we called on eminent domain. There's something under the ground on your land that we want, or we have settlers that are moving into your territory. We're just going to take more of your land away. And they worked out great purchase agreements, great, quote unquote, that they found ways that the Indians never really got what they were promised. And very few. And so we have the United States that we have today. And of course it was under manifest destiny. We declared we are manifest by God, destined to have this whole continent. And we did that. We made that happen. Are we colonialist today? No, not like we were back in the 19th century. And so atrocities were committed, bad things were done. We have a horrible history, but it's mixed in with the history of the United States being that last great bastion of freedom on earth. But what did we do to get there? And I had a good friend of mine. We've been friends since high school. And he was a conservative politician at one point, local, and runs a business, has run a couple of businesses. And he put up a post about we didn't buy the Louisiana Purchase from the Native Americans. We bought it from Napoleon. So there, we've taken the Native American element out of that. And he was making a point that's a good point. When Andrew Jackson made the Louisiana Purchase, which is basically the central third of the United States, right down from the Canadian border to the Gulf of Mexico, that was part of the permanent Indian frontier, a treaty that we wrote when we pushed all the Indian tribes out of the east, everything east of the Mississippi. The problem was Napoleon. Yes, we bought that from Napoleon. We bought it from the French. But Napoleon sold that to us in 1803. That is when the Louisiana... back that up. Napoleon acquired it in 1803 from Native America. We bought it from... Wait. Let me back that up. The permanent Indian frontier... I'm mixing up my dates backwards. 1830 was... Darn it, now I got to look up my dates. I don't have them in front of me. But 1803 was when the Louisiana Purchase took place, if I'm not mistaken. And the permanent Indian frontier was in 1830. Or those are the other way around. I'm trying to think, Jefferson was a president still until 1805. So that had to have been the permanent Indian treaty. Let's see. I'm not typing well this morning. Louisiana Purchase. Let me get my dates right. Yeah, it took place. We purchased that in 1803. We purchased the Louisiana Purchase from the French. And then in 1830, we made the permanent Indian frontier. So any argument that says that we didn't push the Indians off of that land is wrong, because we purchased that from Napoleon in 1803. And 27 years later, we created the permanent Indian frontier. So we moved all the Eastern Indians onto that Louisiana Purchase land. And yet we still rescinded those treaties when we found out there was gold and when settlers wanted that land. And so, yes, we did push Native Americans off of what was the Louisiana Purchase. Sorry for my confusion on my dates there, folks. Didn't mean to do that to you. And so, there is a history of the United States committing atrocities. Slavery, the subjugation of Native American peoples. But what we're left with now is what we have now. We are now the United States of America, and we have been for a long time, over a century. And the problem that we face now is that there are those who would raise their heads and say we deserve to have our land back. Well, you might believe that, but now there's a totally different paradigm in place. The United States exists here. It's what our ancestors did. Do we just pack everything up and give it back to the tribes that they took it from? I don't think that's the solution. I don't think you can even do that anymore. Just look at the United States as it is today. That's not even something we could consider doing. Are there reparations that are necessary? I think more than anybody, if you wanted to talk reparations, I would think Native American tribes would deserve some, because they were screwed royally by the United States and by individual states. So if you want to look at that, I'm not here to break that all down. with this tonight, but that is the history we're looking at. What we're left with is living in the here and the now. We've got reservation land. We've got Indians, Native Americans that are living in this country now. We've got the United States, within whose territories now exist those reservations. I want to get somebody on this show that will talk with me about that. Maybe Reuben Fasthorse is a good person to have on about that, but we'll talk about this in more detail. The governmental side of that, the civic side, lesson side of that, the what is right and what is wrong. What do we do now that we are who we are today? Because there are no Native Americans alive today that were pushed onto reservations by the United States and Manifest Destiny. And there is nobody alive today that made that happen. Although there were atrocities committed since then. So that is one thing to get in mind as we start back into this series again. I am going through, primarily using D. Brown's book, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, going into looking at the conquering of the American West from the 13 colonies and out. And we already know that Native America no longer exists the way it did before. There are some cultural revivalists out there. There are Native American rights that exist. There are reservations out there. Basically, if you ever go to a casino, you're probably on, if you're not in Vegas or Reno or Atlantic City, you are on a reservation somewhere. And so let's take all of that now, as nebulous and as inconclusive as that was. That's just kind of setting the stage for what we're talking about. War comes to the Cheyenne is what we're going to talk about tonight. We've already talked about the Navajo. We've talked about the Santee Sioux and some of the other Sioux tribes, the Mdewakanton, the Dakota Wars in Minnesota. That's where we kind of left off, Little Crow's War. And now we're going to go back a little bit further in time, a decade or so, and look at what happened to the Cheyenne as all of this was going on in the westward expansion of the United States. In 1864, well, before I do that, I want to read a little quote here. Let's see, let me find it here. A little quote here by Motavato, or Black Kettle, of the Southern Cheyenne. He said, "Although wrongs have been done to me, I live in hopes. I've not got two hearts. Now we're together again to make peace. My shame is as big as the earth, although I will do what my friends advise me to do. I once thought that I was the only man that persevered to be the friend of the white man, but since they have come and cleaned out our lodges, our horses, and everything else, it's hard for me to believe white men anymore." And that's Motavato, or Black Kettle, as he was known of the Southern Cheyenne. So in 1851, now what we were looking at with Little Crow's War was 1862 and the few years following. So go back another decade. In 1851, the Cheyenne, the Arapaho, the Sioux, the Crow, and other tribes met at Fort Laramie with representatives of the United States, and they agreed to permit Americans to establish roads and military posts across their territory. This was an agreement they made. And it wasn't just by treaty alone we're taking this, although the United States, I think, would have if they hadn't gotten what they wanted, if history is any meter by which we operated back then. So both parties to the treaty swore to maintain good faith and friendship in all their mutual intercourse, and to make an effective and lasting peace. So by the end of the first decade following the treaty signing in 1851, the white men had driven a hole right through the Indian country along the valley of the Platte River. And the Platte runs through parts of Nebraska and into Colorado, into Denver. So you're talking about the Plains states. And the Plains Indians would have been affected by this. And they drove a hole right through the permanent Indian frontier. And first came the wagon trains, and then a chain of forts, and then the stagecoaches, and a closer-knit chain of forts. Then the Pony Express riders came in, followed by the talking wires of the telegraph. And in that treaty of 1851, the Plains Indians didn't relinquish any rights or claims to their lands. They didn't really relinquish anything. Nor did they surrender the privilege of hunting, or fishing, or passing over any of the tracts of country that were described. The Pikes Peak gold rush of 1858, however, brought white miners by the thousands to dig gold on the Indians' land. The miners built little wooden villages everywhere, and in 1859 they built a big village, and they called it Denver City. And Little Raven, an Arapaho chief, who was amused by the activities of white men, paid a visit to Denver, and he learned to smoke cigars and to eat meat with a knife and fork. He also told the miners he was glad to see them getting gold, but reminded them that the land belonged to the Indians, and expressed the hope that they would not stay around after they found all the yellow metal that they needed. And so the miners not only stayed, but thousands more of them came. The Platte River Valley, which had once teemed with buffalo, began to fill with settlers, staking out ranches and land claims on territory assigned by the Laramie Treaty to southern Cheyennes and Arapaho. And only 10 years after the treaty signing, the Great Council in Washington created the territory of Colorado, and the Great Father sent out a governor, and politicians began maneuvering for a land cessation from the Indians. Land cession. Cession. And though through all of this, the Cheyennes and the Arapahoes kept the peace. And when United States officials invited their leaders to gather at Fort Wise on the Arkansas River to discuss a new treaty, several chiefs responded. Now, they hadn't rescinded the rights yet, but they wanted to discuss, let's rewrite this thing, because we're moving into your territory more, we're doing more settling, we've got to rewrite the treaty. Now, the Indians could have said no, and it would have been immediate war, but they're trying to live in peace with the United States and the white man. And so, according to later statements of chiefs of both tribes, what they were told would be in the treaty and what was actually written into it were quite different things. And it was the understanding of the chiefs that the Cheyenne and the Arapaho would retain their land rights and freedom of movement to hunt buffalo. But what they would agree to live within a triangular section of a territory bounded by the Sand Creek and the Arkansas River. And freedom of movement was an especially vital matter because the reservation assigned to the two tribes had almost no wild game on it, and it was unsuited to agriculture unless irrigated. And so the treaty making at Fort Wise was a gala affair. And because of its importance, Colonel A.B. Greenwood, he was Commissioner of the Indian Affairs, put in an appearance to pass out medals, blankets, sugar, and tobacco. And the little white man, William Bent, he was called the little white man, who had married into the Cheyenne tribe, was there to look after the Indians' interests. And when the Cheyenne pointed out that only 6 of their 44 chiefs were present, the United States officials replied that the others could sign. They can sign later. They don't have to be here today. And none of the others ever did sign. And for that reason, the legality of the treaty was to remain in doubt. And Black Kettle, White Antelope, and Lean Bear were among the signers for the Cheyenne. And we've got to quit there for the first segment. We're going to come back to this after this break. So everybody sit tight. We'll pick up right where we left off.
Are you looking for a really awesome and amazing graphic designer? How about an illustrator or a photographer? This is Rainey Roberts, and I wanted to tell you how you can get my designer, illustrator husband, Scotty Roberts, to work for you on your project. Do you have an awesome self-published book but no cover, or even worse, a cover that really sucks? Do you need a kick-ass logo for your company or some f***ing awesome graphic designs for your ads or website? Then get in touch with my husband for the best f***ing awesome kick-ass design and illustration. He knows his stuff, and he's been at this for more years than I've been alive. Go to ScottAllenRoberts.com. That's Scott with 2 T's, ALANROBERTS.com to take a look at his online portfolio of work, or call 651-468-8115. Now go out and kick some ass with some kick-ass graphic design.
Hire my dad so he can take me to Disneyland.
All right, folks, welcome back to the show. Thanks for sitting on through that break. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. And you can come over and watch the video simulcast on my YouTube channel and join the live chat room, which is going on right now, over at youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Want to thank you for being here tonight. And we're going to pick up right where we left off at the end of the first segment. We're talking about the Cheyenne and how war came to the Cheyenne from the United States because of all this treaty rewriting. And what they wanted to do was rescind the treaty, the first one that they had written, and they wanted to write a new treaty because more settlers were coming in. In essence, the United States was already breaking the treaty, and so let's gather and let's re-talk this and let's rewrite it. So, of the 44 chiefs of the Cheyenne, only 6 appeared for this treaty signing. And this was at Fort, was it at Laramie? Can't remember where I said this was. Fort Wise. And so only 6 of the 44 were present. Now, none of the others ever did sign it. The United States said, that's okay if the rest of them aren't here. They can sign it later. Meaning, you 6 can agree. And they weren't really giving them an option, were they? Well, you guys sign this treaty and the others can, what would that be? The other 38 can sign it later. What does that tell you? The other 38 weren't included in the decision making. So none of the others ever signed it. Black Kettle, White Antelope, Lean Bear were among the signers for the Cheyenne. And Little Raven, Storm, and Big Mouth signed for the Arapaho. Now, witnesses to the signatures were 2 officers of the United States Cavalry, John Sedgwick and J.E.B. Stewart, Jeb Stewart. And a few months later, Sedgwick and Stewart, who urged the Indians to peaceful pursuits, were fighting on opposite sides of the Civil War. And by one of the ironies of history, they died within a few hours of each other in the battles of the wilderness. And so during the first years of the white man's Civil War, Cheyenne and Arapaho hunting parties found it increasingly difficult to stay clear of bluecoat soldiers. They were scouting southward in search of graycoats, and they heard about the troubles of the Navajo, and from friends among the Sioux they learned of the awful fate of the Santee, who dared challenge the power of the soldiers in Minnesota. That was, of course, the Dakota War we talked about, that ended up with 1,700 Santee Sioux imprisoned in the concentration camp at Fort Snelling, and 38 of them hung. Cheyenne and Arapaho chiefs tried to keep their young men busy, hunting buffalo away from the white man's routes. And each summer, however, the numbers and the arrogance of the bluecoats increased. And by the spring of 1864, soldiers were prowling into remote hunting grounds between the Smoky Hill and Republican rivers. And when the grass was well up that year, Roman Nose, there's an Indian name for you, Roman Nose and quite a number of the dog soldier Cheyennes went north for better hunting in the Powder River country with their northern Cheyenne cousins, Black Kettle, White Antelope, and Lean Bear. And they kept their bands below the Platte River, however, and so did Little Raven of the Arapaho. They were careful to avoid the soldiers and the white buffalo hunters by staying away from the forts and the trails for settlement, and the settlers. And so Black Kettle and Lean Bear did go down to Fort Larned in Kansas. And that spring they went down to trade in 1864. Only the year before, the two chiefs had been invited on a visit to see the great father Abraham Lincoln in Washington, D.C., and they were sure that the great father's soldiers at Fort Larned would treat them well. And President Lincoln gave them medals to wear on their chests. And Colonel Greenwood presented Black Kettle with a United States flag. And this is going to come into play later. It was a huge garrison flag with white stars for the 34 states, bigger than glittering stars in the sky on a clear night. And Colonel Greenwood had told him that as long as that flag flew above him, no soldiers would ever fire upon him. This is what Greenwood told Black Kettle. You fly that United States flag above your teepee, above your village, no one will ever attack you. And Black Kettle was very proud of his United States flag. And when it was in permanent, and when he was in permanent camp, he always mounted it on a pole above his teepee. Now, in the middle of May, Black Kettle and Lean Bear heard that soldiers had attacked some Cheyenne on the South Platte River, and they decided to break camp and move northward to join the rest of the tribe for the strength and protection of the numbers together. And after one day's march, they went into camp near Ash Creek, and the next morning, as was the custom, the hunters went out early for game, but they soon came hurrying back. They had seen soldiers with cannons approaching the camp. So Lean Bear liked excitement, and he told Black Kettle he'd go out and meet the soldiers and find out what they wanted. I'll go out. And he hung the medal that Lincoln had given him outside his coat, and he took some papers that had been given him in Washington, certifying that he was a good friend of the United States. And then he rode out with an escort of warriors, and Lean Bear rode up on a hill near camp and saw the soldiers approaching in 4 bunches of cavalry. They had 2 cannons in the center and several wagons strung out in the rear. Wolf Chief, one of the young warriors escorting Lean Bear, said afterward that as soon as the Cheyenne were seen by the soldiers all formed a line in front. They formed up their lines. And Lean Bear told us warriors to stay where we were, Wolf Chief said, so as not to frighten the soldiers, while he rode forward to shake hands with the officer and show his papers. And when the chief was only 20 or 30 yards of the line, the officer called out in a very loud voice, and the soldiers all opened fire on Lean Bear and the rest of us. Lean Bear fell off his horse right in front of the troops, and Star, another Cheyenne, also fell off his horse. The soldiers then rode forward and shot Lean Bear and Star again as they lay helpless on the ground. I was off with a party of young men to one side. There was a company of soldiers in front of us, but they were all shooting at Lean Bear and the other Cheyenne who were near to him. They paid no attention to us until we began firing on them with bows and guns. They were so close that we shot several of them with arrows. 2 of them fell backward off their horses, and by this time there was a great deal of confusion. More Cheyenne kept coming up in small parties, and the soldiers were bunching up and seemed badly frightened, and they were shooting at us with cannon. The grape shot, remember I described what grape shot is? It's all the little bits of iron and lead and all the droppings and ball and stuff like that all crammed into the cannon and fired out, so it splayed with red-hot shrapnel. And the grape shot struck the ground around us, but the aim was bad. Now, this was Wolf Chief, who was one of the young warriors that had been escorting Lean Bear. And in the midst of all the fighting, Black Kettle appeared on his horse, and he began riding up and down among the warriors. "Stop the fighting," he shouted. "Don't make war." And it was a long time before the Cheyennes would listen to him. "We were very mad," Wolf Chief said. But at last he stopped the fighting, and the soldiers ran off. We captured 15 cavalry horses with saddles, bridles, saddlebags on them. Several soldiers were killed. Lean Bear, Star, and one more Cheyenne were killed, and many were wounded. And the Cheyenne were sure that they could have killed all the soldiers and captured their mountain howitzers. And because 500 Cheyenne warriors were in the camp against 100 soldiers. And as it was, many of the young men, infuriated by the cold-blooded killing of Lean Bear, chased the retreating soldiers in a running fight all the way to Fort Larned. Black Kettle was bewildered by this sudden attack. Remember, Black Kettle, he wants peace. He doesn't want there to be war. And he was bewildered by this attack. And he grieved for Lean Bear, his friend. And they'd been friends for almost half a century at this point. Imagine a friend of yours for 50 years. I'm getting close to where I have friends of 50 years. I've got guys who've been friends of mine since my high school days, 43, 44 years ago. So imagine that. And his friend is killed. And he's not sure why they killed him. And he remembered how Lean Bear's curiosity was also always getting him into trouble. And sometime before, when the Cheyenne paid a friendly visit to Fort Atkinson on the Arkansas River, Lean Bear noticed a bright, shiny ring worn by an officer's wife. Impulsively, he took hold of the woman's hand to look at her ring. And the woman's husband rushed up and slashed Lean Bear with a big whip. Lean Bear turned and jumped on his horse and rode back to the Cheyenne camp. He painted his face and rode through the camp, urging the warriors to join him in attacking the fort. A Cheyenne chief had been insulted, he cried. Black Kettle and the other chiefs had a hard time calming him down that day. Now Lean Bear was dead, and his death had stirred the warriors to a far deeper anger than the insulted Fort Atkinson. Imagine if that had happened. Put it in today's context. Say the President of the United States is visiting a foreign head of state, and that head of state took Donald Trump's wife by the hand to look at her wedding ring. Oh, that's beautiful. And a soldier came up and whipped him across the face because he was touching the First Lady. It was tantamount to that, except, of course, in the United States in the 19th century, we didn't recognize these chiefs as being equal in status to the white chiefs. And so Black Kettle couldn't understand why the soldiers had attacked a peaceful Cheyenne camp without warning. He supposed that if anyone would know, it would be his old friend Little White Man, William Bent. And so for more than 30 years had passed since Little White Man and his brothers had come to the Arkansas River and built Bent's fort. William had married Owl Woman, and after she died, he married her sister Yellow Woman. Now, Woman was not the last name. Owl Woman and Yellow Woman. In all those years, the Bents and the Cheyenne had lived in close friendship. And the Little White Man had 3 sons and 2 daughters, and they lived much of that time with their mother's people, the Cheyenne. And that summer, 2 of the half-breed sons, George and Charlie, were hunting buffalo with the Cheyenne on the Smoky Hill River. After some thought about the matter, Black Kettle sent a messenger on a fast pony to find the Little White Man. "Tell him we've had a fight with the soldiers and killed several of them," Black Kettle said. "Tell him we do not know what the fight was about or for, and that we would like to see him and talk with him about it." Now, by chance, Black Kettle's messenger found William Bent on the road between Fort Larned and Fort Lyon. And Lyon, I guess it is Lyon, French. And Brent sent the messenger back with instructions for Black Kettle to meet him on Coon Creek. A week later, the old friends met, both concerned over the future of the Cheyenne. Bent especially worried about his sons. He was relieved to learn that they were hunting on the Smoky Hill, and no trouble had been reported from there, but he knew of 2 fights that had occurred elsewhere. At Fremont's Orchard, north of Denver, a band of dog soldiers was attacked by a patrol of Colonel John M. Chivington's Colorado Volunteers, who were out looking for stolen horses. The dog soldiers were herding a horse and a mule, picked up as strays, but Chivington's soldiers opened fire before giving the Cheyennes an opportunity to even explain where they'd obtained the animals. Started shooting on them. And you think about that today, it's over a horse and a mule. So the human life was cheaper than the horse and the mule. So after this engagement, Chivington sent out a larger force, which attacked a Cheyenne camp near Cedar Bluffs, killing 2 women and 2 children. 2 more lives gone, over a horse and a mule. The artillery soldiers who had attacked Black Kettle's camp on May 16th were also Chivington's men. They sent out from Denver with no authority to operate in Kansas, and the officer in command, Lieutenant George S. Ear, E-A-Y-R-E, those kinds of vowels put together throw me every time. Ear was under orders from Colonel Chivington to kill Cheyennes whenever and wherever found. That's just the orders he had, the carte blanche. Kill Cheyennes wherever you find them. And now if such incidents continued, William Bent and Black Kettle agreed a general war was bound to break out all over the plains. And it's not my intention or wish to fight the whites, Black Kettle said. I want to be friendly. I want to be peaceable. I want to keep my tribe so. I'm not able to fight the whites. I want to live in peace. This is all he wanted, and all most of them wanted. Even though they're losing their lands bit by bit, their hunting grounds, they said, look, there's still enough space for us to live together. Let's do it peaceably. This is all I want. And Bent told Black Kettle to keep his young men from making revenge raids, and he promised he'd return to Colorado and try to persuade the military authorities not to continue on the dangerous road they were taking. He then set out for Fort Leon. On my arrival there later, he testified under oath, I met Colonel Chivington, related to him. Now this is little. I keep wanting to say Little Big Man because of the movie, and I think it's based on him. Little White Man, Brent, Brent, and so he said in his meeting with Covington, he says I related to him Chivington. Said I related to him the conversation that had taken place between me and the Indians, and that the chiefs desired to be friendly. In reply, he said he was not authorized to make peace. I'm not authorized to make peace. That's kind of a weird response, I think, altogether. And that he was then on the warpath, I think were the words he used. I then stated to him that there was great risk to run in keeping up the war, that there were a great many government trains traveling to New Mexico and other points, also a great many citizens, and that I did not think there was sufficient force to protect the travel, and that the citizens and the settlers of the country would have to suffer. He said the citizens would have to protect themselves, and then said no more to him. So that was Little White Man. So late in June, the governor of Colorado Territory, John Evans, issued a circular addressed to the friendly Indians of the plains, informing them that some members of their tribes had gone to war with white people. Governor Evans declared that in some instances they have attacked and killed soldiers, and he made no mention of soldiers attacking and killing Indians, although this was the way of all 3 fights with the Cheyenne had begun. That's how they had all started, was soldiers killing Indians. And for this the great father is angry, Evans continued, and he'll certainly hunt down and punish them, but he does not want to injure those who remain friendly to the whites. He desires to protect and take care of them, and for this purpose I direct that all friendly Indians keep away from those who are at war and go to places of safety. Evans then ordered friendly Cheyenne and Arapaho to report to Fort Lyon. So now they're having to report to the fort again, the peaceful ones. And on their reservation is where Fort Lyon is, and where their agent Samuel G. Coley would furnish them with provisions and show them a place of safety. Now, the object of this is to prevent friendly Indians from being killed through mistake. The war on hostile Indians will be continued until they're all effectually subdued. That was part of his order. So we just don't want to kill you peaceful ones by mistake, meaning the general order was kill them all. So as soon as William Bent learned of Governor Evans' decree, he started immediately to warn the Cheyenne and the Arapaho to come into Fort Lyon, because the various bands were scattered across the western Kansas for their summer hunts, and several weeks passed before runners could reach all of them. So during this period, clashes between soldiers and Indians steadily increased. Sioux warriors, aroused by General Alfred Sully's punitive expeditions of 1863 and 1864 into Dakota, swarmed down from the north to raid wagon trains, stagecoach stations, and settlers along the Platte route. And for these actions, the Southern Cheyenne and the Arapaho received much of the blame and most of the attention of the Colorado soldiers. Now, William Bent's half-breed son, George, who was with a large band of Cheyenne on the Solomon River in July, said that they were attacked again and again by troops without any cause, until they began retaliating in the only way they knew how, burning the stage stations, chasing the coaches, running off stock, and forcing the freighters to corral their trains and fight. So Black Kettle and the other chiefs tried to stop these raids, but their influence was weakened by the appeal of the younger leaders, such as Roman Nose, and by the members of Hotamayo. H-O-T. Let's sound it out now, Scotty. H-O-T-A-M-I, Hatami Tanayo, or the Dog Soldier Society. That's all that meant. And so when Black Kettle discovered that 7 white captives, 2 women and 5 children, had been brought into the Smoky Hill camps by the raiders, he ransomed 4 of them from the captors with his own ponies so that he could return them to their relatives. And about this time, he finally received a message from William Bent informing him of Governor Evans' order to report to Fort Lyon. Now, it was now late August, and Evans had issued a second proclamation authorizing all citizens of Colorado, either individually or in such parties as they may organize, to go in pursuit of all hostile Indians on the plains, and scrupulously avoiding those who have responded to my call to rendezvous at the points indicated. So also to kill and destroy as enemies of the country, wherever they may be found, all such hostile Indians. So it's basically a shoot-to-kill order. And the hunt was already on for all Indians not confined to one of the assigned reservations. And so Black Kettle immediately held a council, and all the chiefs in the camp agreed to comply with the governor's requirements for peace. George Bent, a little white man, who had been educated at Webster College in St. Louis, was asked to write a letter to Agent Samuel Coley at Fort Lyon, informing him that they wanted peace. Quote, "We heard that you have some prisoners in Denver. We have 7 prisoners of yours, which we're willing to give up, providing you give up yours. We want true news from you in return." Now, Black Kettle had hoped that Coley would give him instructions as to how to bring his Cheyennes across Colorado without being attacked by soldiers or roving bands of the Governor Evans' armed citizens. And he didn't entirely trust Coley. He suspected the agent of selling part of the Indians' allotment of goods for his own profit. So Black Kettle did not yet know how deeply involved Coley was with the Governor Evans and Colonel Chivington in their scheme to drive the Plains Indians from Colorado. The plot is actually very thick between these guys. And on July 26th, the agent had written Evans that they could not depend on any of the Indians to keep the peace. I now think little powder and lead is the best food for them, he concluded. This was Coley, the Indian agent. I now think a little powder and lead is the best for them. Now, because of his distrust of Coley, Black Kettle had a second copy of the letter written out and addressed to William Bent. He gave the separate copies to Ochini, One Eye, and Eaglehead, Ochini, Ochinee, Ochini, One Eye, and Eaglehead, and he ordered them to ride for Fort Leon. Now, 6 days later, as One Eye and Eaglehead were approaching the fort, they were suddenly confronted by 3 soldiers. The soldiers took firing positions, but One Eye quickly made signs for peace. He held up Black Kettle's letter. I've got a letter. And in a few moments, the Indians were being escorted into Fort Leon as prisoners and handed over to the commanding officer, Major Edward Wynkoop. Now, Tall Chief Wynkoop was suspicious of the Indians' motives. And when he learned from One Eye that Black Kettle wanted him to come out to Smoky Hill Camp and guide the Indians back to the reservation, he asked how many Indians there were. 2,000 Cheyenne and Arapaho, One Eye replied, and perhaps 200 of their Sioux friends from the north who were tired of being chased by soldiers. So Wynkoop made no reply to this. He had scarcely more than 100 mounted soldiers, and he knew the Indians knew the size of his force. So suspecting a trap, not trusting these guys at all, he ordered the Cheyenne messengers imprisoned in the guardhouse, called his officers together for a council. Now, the tall chief was young, in his mid-20s, and his only military experience was one battle against Texas Confederates in New Mexico. And so for the first time in his career, he was faced with a decision that could mean disaster for his entire command. This is the way he viewed this. And so after a day's delay, Wynkoop finally decided that he would not have to go to the Smoky Hill, not for the sake of the Indians, but to rescue the white prisoners. So no doubt it was for this reason that Black Kettle had mentioned the prisoners in his letter. He knew that white men could not abide the thought of white women and children living with the Indians. And so on September 6th, Wynkoop was ready to march with 127 mounted troops. Releasing One Eye and Eaglehead from the guardhouse, he told them that they would be serving as both guides and hostages for the expedition. And so at the first sign of treachery from your people, Wynkoop warned them, I'll kill you. So the Cheyennes do not break their word, One Eye replied. If they should do so, I would not care to live longer. So Wynkoop said afterward that his conversations with the 2 Cheyennes on this march caused him to change his long-held opinions of Indians. He said, I felt myself in the presence of superior beings. And these were the representatives of a race that I heretofore looked upon without exception as being cruel, treacherous, and bloodthirsty, without feeling or affection for friend or kindred. He said that's the way he used to feel about them, and it was these 2 Cheyenne guides that had come to him with the message from Black Kettle that convinced him otherwise. He said they are how did he say that? He said, I felt myself in the presence of superior beings because of these 2 guys. And so 5 days later, along the headwaters of the Smoky Hill, Wynkoop's advanced scouts sighted a force of several hundred warriors drawn up as though for battle. George Bent, who was still with Black Kettle, said that when Wynkoop's soldiers appeared, the Dog soldiers got ready to fight a war and rode out to meet the troops with bows strung and arrows in their hands. But Black Kettle and some of the chiefs interfered, and requesting Major Wynkoop to move his troops off a little distance, they prevented the fight. And that's where we have to stop for tonight. It's a little bit of a cliffhanger because there's a whole lot more coming to this story. and the Cheyenne. Folks, sit tight. We'll be back tomorrow night. We'll pick this up where we left off. Have a good night.